I am Virginia Saussy, and I'm an independent marketing consultant. And I'm sure y'all are thinking, what does that have anything to do with Katrina? But what I realized on August 29th, 2005, was that I lived an entirely New Orleans life. It consumed every part of my being. I ran, at the time I was the vice president of Mignon Faget. I just finished a renovation in July of a 6,000 square foot home in Broadmoor, and I spent pretty much all of my free time on a Mardi Gras parade. So I felt like I was New Orleans, and I was watching it all wash away at once. But what I realized was that there were a lot of these moments right after Katrina that became those inspirations or infuriations that inspired us to recover. The day that I came into New Orleans a week after the storm, and I had to call my boss, who is jewelry designer Mignon Faget, and tell her which stores were looted. And she said, I don't know if I could go through rebuilding this business. And I thought, no, there's no way. This is all I've got. And it inspired us. Taking the fleur-de-lis jewelry that Mignon had designed, that we had sitting in our closed stores, and creating this rebirth campaign benefiting the New Orleans, the Louisiana Cultural Economy Foundation, which enabled us to bring in a lot of money, raise a lot of money to help bring other artists back to New Orleans. And we had just laid off 72 of our 80 employees. And the fleur-de-lis sales allowed us to bring them all back, one fleur-de-lis at a time, by December 1st, which was amazing. There was that day when I got my newspaper and opened it up. That was after you had to walk half a mile to get your newspaper because no one would deliver them to Broadmoor because they said nobody lived there. And I opened it up to find this big green dot right on top of where I lived. And I had just put my whole life savings in rewiring the house that I had just rewired the year before. So it was one of those moments where you read that we all had 5 months to prove that our neighborhood would come back to life, that inspired Broadmoor Lives. And really, we wanted to say, come back to life. We're alive right now. If you just drove through the neighborhood, you'd see it. But it ended up inspiring really one of the strongest repopulation efforts in New Orleans. And then there was this one day when CNN had this question to the population that reads CNN.com, which at the time we were all kind of big into CNN. And it said, should New Orleans be allowed to have Mardi Gras? Is it too soon to party? And it might have pissed me off more than the big green dot. Because, frankly, the other third of my life was my role as the theme chairman, float chairman, and creative director of the Krewe of Muses. And, I thought, CNN has a right to pass judgment on our celebration? Because the captain of Muses had called me on September 1st and said, we have to order all of our throws from China. Are we going to have Mardi Gras? And on the Friday before Katrina, the artist had given me the color sketches of that year's parade. And the theme was Muses Got Game. We didn't have time to change that. So, it wasn't a matter of if we were going to have Mardi Gras. It was like, how much do we need Mardi Gras that year? It was just a critical point in our lives, and this was a special part of New Orleans. But, of course, we did satire. We liked doing a lot of political and satirical things. So Katrina became the Muses Got Game game changer. And we reworked a lot of floats very quickly to get them on the street for that Mardi Gras. And Katrina did have its influence on the theme. The blame game became an immediate point of topic, because it was like Negan, Bobegan, Banana, Fana, Fofeg. FEMA became our barrel of monkeys. And of course, the most humiliating things that happened to our city, those things that made you cringe that you were even from the city at that point, like the Gretna Police Department blocking the bridge, became Rover, get your asses back over. And I actually had a Muses license plate on my car, and I couldn't drive on the West Bank for like 2 years without getting pulled over. And of course, It was an Olympic year, even though none of us were really paying attention to the Olympics because we were trying to figure out where you can buy a mattress. And so the obscure sport of curling became hurling, the act of getting your refrigerator out of your home and onto the street. And then the refrigerators actually became this sort of maggot-ridden symbol of our recovery. They reflect, if anybody can remember the smell of refrigerators on the streets of New Orleans, it was unforgettable. I still can't figure out how the maggots got in there. But refrigerators were everywhere. Actually, Tom Verisco even did a great book called Spoiled. That was a collection of refrigerators. And then every year, Muses, for the first decade of Muses, every year we ended with the Sirens. She was there, because the Sirens and the parade, and then the Sirens were cast out by the Muses. So that year, our Sirens said, "Come hell or high water, there's no place like home." And she reflected what we were all feeling. And really, satire that year, you saw it everywhere. Krewe of Muses did C'est la vie. My favorite float was Bias Back Chirac with a mime in a box. And Coup d'etat and Chaos, they poked fun at the core, one of our favorite scapegoats. And Mid-City, that was famous for doing tinfoil floats, used blue tarp. And blue tarp became the fabric of our lives. In fact, that Mardi Gras, you saw blue tarp everywhere you looked. You saw MRE purses. And really, during a time where everybody had really been brought down to their knees, if you didn't get destroyed, you felt guilty that you didn't get destroyed. But everybody kind of pitched in to this humor that got us through. It was our satire therapy. And actually, right about that time, and you saw a whole lot of refrigerators. Right about that time, Muses, we immediately had this idea for the next year. Because, Muses Got Game was already planned before the storm. So we created this character named NOLA Rising, and she was your average, ordinary muse who waded back to her flooded home post-Katrina and opened the refrigerator door thinking, how bad could this be? And the toxic combination of nail polish, champagne, old Chinese food, and spoiled milk exploded, and baking soda exploded, giving her superpowers, a vision from the 9 Muses, and the objective to save New Orleans. Because we decided if New Orleans ever needed a superhero, this was when we needed her. So actually it became this great way this was a year and a half after the storm. Or a year after the storm when we were doing it. So you really got to express your feelings about people, and they became either heroes or arch nemesis. Like Mighty Mouth, who was our Mayor Nagin. Then there was Wondering Woman, wondering what she was supposed to be doing. Cooper Man, saving us one photo op at a time. The Scavengers from all over the place. And then by this point, depression was sinking in, and Chris Rose was kind of the inspiration for the Incredible Sulk. Don't make him sad. You wouldn't like him when he's sad. He turns into the Incredible Sulk. And then, of course, our wetlands became the poor eroding swamp thing disappearing, and Nutria Boy was taking a bite out of him. And that year, our Sirens float said, "You have the power to save New Orleans," and it actually had a big mirror on the side. So when it rolled by, it reflected that of the people that were standing on the sides. We threw 37,000 comic books that year, and they had to have a Sea Monkeys ad in them. That was really those real live New Orleans citizens you have seen on TV over and over and over again, all living in a FEMA trailer the size of a fishbowl. But you can only get Sea Monkeys with community block grants or LRA funds. Or Spit in a Prayer, I think was one of them. Hope in a Prayer. So the subject of Katrina didn't leave for a while. And as things got more and more frustrating, we just kept making our jokes. So the next year at a disco spoof, Blakely became the Zarwash, working at the Zarwash. And then, FEMA, who was our scapegoat, became FEMA. It was like our YMCA song. So sad. And making fun of FEMA kind of became thing for me. Because that year, the Broadmoor Festival, we actually got a FEMA official to sit in the dunking booth in 58-degree weather. And we raised like $800 dunking the FEMA official. And every time he went in, we would tell him he would get a towel in 2 to 3 weeks. It was good. And of course, the disco year, we said, I am New Orleans and I will survive. But you know, even though it was 2008 was to an end, in 2009, the subject was still there. It was a James Bond spoof, and by that time, Thunderball was tearing down our housing projects. And people were all really depressed at this point, so we had a quantum of solace in the form of alcohol and prescription medication handling our PTSD. And so we kept, and that year we were New Orleans, shaken but not stirred. And we kept actually, I think that this was 2005, and I'm a little worried I had a premonition, because that year we'd done a TV spoof, and one of them was 60 Feet Under, which was Ray Nagin floating underwater saying, everything's under control. It's just a minor setback. And then we kept making Katrina jokes until we had something new to spoof that was just as tragic and heartbreaking, like the oil spill in the Gulf. But back to that email had upset us so much and really had inspired a lot of our fury into satire. And it was funny because when I went and looked at it online, my response was the first one on CNN.com, saying that, you know, the night before I had written in Muses, and it was the first time I'd felt normal in 5 months, and how important Mardi Gras was for our community. And we had an answer to it in Muses that year. It was Mnemosyne, who is the mother of the Muses and the goddess of memory. And the last float in the parade was her. It was this huge head with big latex tears rolling down her face. And it was our answer to the people who tried to judge our Mardi Gras in New Orleans. And it said, we celebrate life, we mourn the past, we shall never forget. And after 3 funny parades and people out on the street, tears just rolled and everybody got their relief and got to feel how they did. So I like to say, if we don't laugh, we cry, but sometimes we do both. Thank you.